I have never done something quite like this, so I'm prepared. I've got my story that I'm going to share with you on my experience, strength, and hope, and that'll take a while. And then I'm going to start talking about the seventh tradition and some of the subtleties associated with the seventh tradition. It's not. It took me a while to really realize that there's more to the seventh tradition than one just gets by reading it. So so I'm going to talk about myself for the first part of the session and my history with my codependency, and then we'll take a break, and then I'll start talking about um, the seventh tradition and my story of service really with CoDA. Christina, hit on the events committee, and that was certainly a huge part of my service to CoDA, but there's more that I want to share. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and start uh, doing my history, my experience, strength, and hope. I've got notes here that I'm going to be looking down at. I'm not going to read it to you. I'm just going to keep myself on the path by glancing at it now and then, and make sure I don't skip something. I think I can tie my codependency back to 1920. And you got to wonder, how is that possible? Because I wasn't born until 1953. But in 1920, my grandfather, my mother's father, was killed in a tragic mine accident when mom was about 2. And so her life started out pretty rough. I don't know, as she grew a little bit older and became more aware that her dad was not with them, I'm guessing that she was having some feelings of abandonment, even though she didn't really realize what it was, but there was something missing in her life. I think my grandmother was a wonderful person. She probably raised my mom the best she could, but mom had her own challenges. And then in the 20s, somewhere in there, my dad was infected with tuberculosis. And he spent a lot of time in isolation and recovery from tuberculosis. And he spent his time reading but really not socializing or anything, So he was probably 12 to 15 years old when he got tuberculosis, and was isolated for a long time trying to recover from. He fortunately moved to Arizona when he was 1, I think. So he was in the right place for tuberculosis recovery. Arizona used to be the place to go for recovery from tuberculosis. And then in the 1930s, Dad lost hearing in his left ear, completely went deaf due to some disease. Back in the 30s, it was they didn't have the medical technology that they have now, and he lost his hearing in one ear. And then, believe it or not, in 1971, is a long time later, on Halloween night, he completely lost his hearing. For all intents and purposes, he became deaf. And he was a pediatrician, so he had to quit his practice. He couldn't, use a stethoscope to hear anything. And that, when he went deaf, I was a freshman in college. So it really wasn't part of my childhood, but it certainly was a part of his whole continuity of life. So, like I said, I was born in 1953. And then when I was 2, sort of like when my mom was 2, my grandfather, my uncle, and 2 of my uncle's children uh, drowned. They were on the Klamath River on the West Coast, and we really don't know what happened, but their bodies were washed out to sea. We recovered only 1 of the 4 people. It was a huge tragedy for my family. And, that tragedy, I think, exploded out into the whole family as a whole and changed the whole dynamic, not just my family, I was only 2, so I don't really remember it, but the effect of that rippled throughout my whole life because my family has depression scattered all through it. Um, the family broke apart. You know, my dad had 5 brothers and sisters, each of which had like 4 or 5 kids. I literally have 32 first cousins. And, the family just wasn't the same, I don't believe, after that tragedy that happened in 55. You know, why do I mention all of this? Well, my parents suffered. They had their own troubles, their own problems in their lives, and they had to deal with it, and well, my mom turned out, she started drinking. And my dad, I believe, I'm making this story up, but I've thought about it a lot and I've done a lot of therapy about it and thought back on my childhood. And I might be a little bit wrong, but I'm not way wrong. When he was suffering with tuberculosis and all he had to do to fill his time was read, well, that became his thing. He became addicted. I think his addiction was reading, not just reading, but intellect. That was how he got his self-esteem. And he just read all the time. He would go to work. He was a pediatrician. He would go to work and he would, do his practice and he'd go on rounds and even did home visits and things. He took me with him sometimes, which were parts of my abandonment because he'd go into the house and leave me in the car and I'd sit in a dark car for 2 hours while he was doing a home visit, and I'd be sitting there lonely and scared, but the thing is, my parents were there. They were in the house. I was raised well. We had a beautiful home. I had clothes. I ate everything. I was made to eat more than I really wanted to eat. You know how that goes. And, for all intents and purposes, it was a wonderful upbringing. But the deal was, mom was drinking and she wasn't a nasty drinker. She just drank, and then she isolated with her own self. And so she was there, but she wasn't present. And dad, he'd come home from work and we'd eat dinner at 6 o'clock sharp. And then, woe be it to you if you weren't there at 6 o'clock for dinner. You'd get a tongue lashing. And then he would go read. And I could look at him. He was sitting right there. I could see him, but he wasn't there for me. He never. I can honestly say this, that neither one of my parents actively participated in my life in any real way. Um, at some point along the way, mom tried to commit suicide. I don't know that she was serious about that. I think it was more a cry for help because she didn't take quite enough of the pills that she took to actually kill her. But she got hauled off in its ambulance and they saved her. Dad used reading as his way of gaining self-esteem. Knowledge was his method of self-esteem. He read everything. He was a super smart man. My sister tells a story of when she lived in Bisbee, Arizona, southern Arizona, and it's a real small town. It was a small mining town. Dad picked up the phone book, which was probably 10 pages, I don't know, and he memorized the whole freaking thing. And you could, somebody would say, "Oh, you didn't do that," and they'd open the book and say, "What's the phone number for Joe Smith?" And he could repeat the phone number. I mean, the guy was amazing, but he was so into himself and he had no really expression of emotion. He didn't teach me about emotion at all. I did not know what emotion was. And, the net result was I just had tremendous feelings of abandonment. I didn't know them as abandonment, but it was, it kind of manifested itself in loneliness and uncertainty and being fearful of doing the wrong thing. Mom would I remember getting told to go out and I don't know why I won't even talk about that, but she had her own way of punishing us that was kind of brutal and shaming. So I had some shame mixed in with all of that. My, I have a brother and a sister. My sister recently passed away, but she was 12 years older than I am, and my brother was 7 years older than I am. So I was kind of raised as an only child too. By the time I became aware, like at age 5 or 6 or something, my sister was married and graduated. She got married very early. She went and, he went away to college. And my brother was in high school and he was doing his own thing, and so mom and dad were pretty much left with me. Um, you know, I got, I've in the process of going through therapy on my family of history and my family of origin stuff. You know, my therapist asked me to think of things that made an impact on my life, and I started out with one or two things. I didn't have very many things I could remember, but the more I dug into it, the more I discovered and remembered, and I ended up with like 35 things specific events that I could remember that were I could associate with abandonment and fear, specifically fear of shame. Um, and I was probably a teenager at this point. Came home from doing whatever I was doing. I was probably drunk at the time, and Dad didn't seem to care. Um, we were sitting at the dinner table at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and we were chatting, and he shared his philosophy about raising children with me. And his philosophy was, I believe children should figure it out by themselves. As simple as that, and that told his whole perspective on how I was raised. And that's exactly how I felt I was raised. I had to figure it all out by myself. And, it's kind of a weird philosophy given that he was a pediatrician, and you would think he would be really into children and making sure that children were absolutely taken care of in the best way. And I have proof that he treated his patients that way. When he had to retire, I took, I have an album of dozens and dozens of memos and letters and notes from his patients telling him how wonderful of a doctor he was and how much they were going to miss him and all that kind of stuff. And I look at that album now, having been in recovery and done my family of origin stuff, and it actually kind of pisses me off because I think he treated his patients better than he treated his children. And that hurt. I still have it over there. I hardly ever pull it out because it kind of triggers me. It just, it's just not right. Um, a lot of my memories of early childhood, I mean, like in the area of 6 to 10, maybe, have to do with extreme loneliness. My parents weren't there for me. I had one really good friend. He and I loved each other. We did everything together. We spent the night at each other's house. We laughed over everything. We had so much fun. But then during the summer, his mother was from Virginia, and every summer she would go back to Virginia to be with her mom. And so John, my best friend, would disappear for 2.5 months. And I don't know if you can imagine Phoenix in the summertime when it's 110 out, there isn't a lot to do, and it's too darn hot to go outside and do anything. So I ended up spending a lot of time during the summer completely alone. My parents worked, and they let him figure it out, left me at home kind of an attitude. And this is I'm an engineer, so I had to prove a lot of stuff to myself when I was doing this family of origin thing. And so I studied all these incidences where felt like abandonment or shamed or feared or any of those, fear issues. And this is one that came up, was that at the end of the summer, about when John, and remember, this was 1960. At the end of the, we didn't have phones. I mean, we had phones. We had no idea what the Maples were. His name was John Maples. Probably broke tradition there, but I doubt any of you know him. when he was supposed to come home, I would literally call his house every half hour and let the phone just ring, hoping he would walk in the door so I'd have somebody to play with. And for like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 days, whatever, because I just started. Of course, back then you had the rotary dial, so you had to dial 6 numbers, and it was torture, really, waiting for John to show back up in town so I could have somebody to play with. And that, that kind of, I don't know, I just missed him so much. I I remember a lot of anger, maybe associated with him not being there, but just in general, anger with my frustration of not being raised properly, or at least not raised with love and care. I expressed that anger by starting fires. I burned a guy's fence down once because I was out playing with matches behind his thing, and it probably was accidental, but I did. I burned the guy's fire. The fire department came and put the fence out, and the whole deal, and I got in all kinds of trouble for that. And one time I took some, those little tiki torches that people used to like, would put kerosene in them and they put them out for a Hawaiian feel and all that crap. Mom and dad love those things. So one time I took some of that kerosene and poured it all over my toys and burned them, trying to maybe get attention. Any attention's better than no attention. So I burned all my Tonka toys. There's something seriously wrong with a child that burns their own toys. It's it kind of proves my mental outlook at that point in time. I have a scar on my leg that I have today from when I was told to go take a shower, and I got so mad at my parents that I went upstairs and got in the shower with one of those glass sliding door things. And I was so mad, I banged on the door and the glass broke and it took a hunk out of my leg. And then I ran downstairs naked and bleeding all over the place, and the cat was licking my blood. And, it was kind of a gross thing. But again, I was just super angry. Okay, so that's how I was raised, and then I started, well, I was at the end of when I was old enough, I kind of through my teenage years, and during which, when I was on the swim team, my parents never came to a single swim meet to watch me swim. They were zero participation in my life. It was just a continuation of ignoring John. The end result was I was left with almost no emotional skills. My dad never taught me how a man should be feeling his emotions. He didn't have any emotions other than, I don't know, his ego that said he had to be the smartest man on earth. I had low self-esteem. There were some sexual things that happened in my early childhood that they never gave me any guidance on. So I had a lot of sexual misunderstandings and confusion and just general fear, because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know how people would treat me if I behaved in a certain way. I didn't know what good behavior was. And it all kind of turned into anger, and I remember being a really angry child. I used to like one time I chased one of my neighbor kids out of the house and beat him up on his front lawn. That was one of the only times that I was in a fight. And, and then somehow I just suppressed all that anger. I just became not angry. I think maybe I made a decision to be not angry. And it was like, okay, I wasn't angry anymore, but that didn't mean I had cured my anger by any means. And it stayed there for, until I got into recovery, really. Anyway, when I went away to college, I learned how to medicate my anger. I started using drugs and alcohol. And I didn't get into heavy duty drugs. I was basically just smoked pot. Every once in a while, I would take some kind of a hallucinogen, acid or magic mushrooms or something, but mostly it was just pot and drinking. I drank a lot. And when I went down to college, my response to the loss of normal and familiar that I had at home was I went crazy. I started smoking cigarettes, even though I hated my parents for smoking. They were both chimney smokers. And, I would just sit in the back seat and just yell at them about smoking. But the first thing I did when I went away to college was start smoking. You know, it doesn't make any sense. I joined a fraternity that was probably the most drug abusive fraternity on campus, drug and alcohol. And I fit right in, you know. They used to have what we called the bleachers out in back of the fraternity, and we go out there and smoke pot on the bleachers, and the campus cops would drive by and just wave at us. They didn't care. But we got high every night, every night. And as a result, my freshman year was pretty much a disaster. I went down there, I studied electrical engineering. You know, at the end of, you know, the normal course load was 15 units a semester. At the end of my freshman year, I think I might have gotten away with 15 units total. You know, I withdrew from so many classes, and I was just really pretty much out of control. And I think back on that, and my dad, you know, you would think he'd be saying something. Both mom and dad be saying something about that. What are you doing down there? You know, we're spending good money on you. You need to be performing, blah, blah, blah. They never said a thing. No big deal. It was weird how little they cared about me. You know, the amazing thing is that after my sophomore year, I really seriously thought about quitting college and just going to a trade school or something and doing something else. But somehow I got my act together. I'm not quite sure how. And I decided I was going to continue with my engineering education. And I ended up graduating on time, even though I missed 15 units my freshman year. My senior year I took 19 units my first semester and 21 units my second semester of all engineering classes. And I just basically busted ass to get out of college. And I did. I got out of college on time. And I was so ready to get out of college that when I put my senior project on my professor's desk at 6 a.m., because I'd worked on it all night long, I got in my car and never came back to the U of A for 25 years. And the next time I came back, I was a recruiting engineer. So I just was completely done with school. I didn't want anything to do with it. You know, I met my wife to be, in my senior year in college, and a couple months before I graduated. And you know, we connected, we started dating. I graduated before she did, so she had another semester to go, and we dated from, you know, did distance dating for 6 months. And somehow it worked. You know, I think back on it, and, you know, when I decided to marry her, or at least seriously date her, I think my feelings were probably like, wow, somebody likes me, you know, and I better hang on to this person because she might be the only one out there that's going to ever like me. And so you know, 2 years later, we were married, and, you know, we were married in 77. So anyway, I graduated. I left drugs behind with college. I really didn't do drugs after college at all. But alcohol was firmly a part of my life. I won't go into the details, but I led my life for the next 40 years or so in fear and unwilling or incapable of standing up for myself. I just didn't have the skill set to understand my feelings, have that self-respect and self-love, to be able to do that. You know, I just didn't know what I wanted or deserved, and my wife did things to me that I now realize felt like abandonment to me, and my resentments built. That suppressed anger that went away when I was a teenager, started coming back, you know, because it will come back if you don't deal with it, and it did. Both my parents died within a year of each other. This was back in the early 90s. And the funny thing about what that was, it changed me. When mom died first, she was unexpected. She died suddenly. Dad was in a memory unit, and his passing wasn't a surprise. But when he passed second of the two, and when he passed, my head went kind of nutso on that. It made me realize that even though I had nothing going with them, you know, other than a casual father, parent, children, I hardly ever saw him, put it that way. When he passed, I realized that I had been spending my whole life trying to prove my worth to them. And I realized that I was never going to be able to do that now because they were both gone. And the wind kind of just came out of my sails for some reason. I didn't feel as motivated as I did before, and my drinking got worse. Um, Everything got worse, really, and especially my relationship with my wife. And it just started to spiral downward. It's kind of odd, but given my relationship with my parents, maybe it's not odd. I don't know. Maybe it's perfectly normal or expected. I did not abandon my children. You know, I was exactly the opposite. I went to every little league game. I went to every soccer game. I went to every softball game. I went to my daughter's tennis, my oldest daughter's tennis stuff. I flew radio controlled airplanes with my son. We went go-kart, right? We bought him a go-kart. We went go-kart riding. And, you know, I I believe that the best thing you can do for a child is just simply spend time with them. Because I didn't get it. It doesn't, you know, I didn't get it from my folks. And it doesn't matter what you do. It's the act that you're willing to give up your own time to spend with them that gives them that feeling of being loved and nurtured and cared about, you know. And so through all of this, some miracle, whatever, I was a good parent. I was a really, I think, without trying to brag or anything, I think I was a really good father. Um, but when the last child left for college, you know, there was just me and my wife who were left there. And our relationship was really no better than just being roommates. At that time, work was, I used to work at a nuclear power plant, and then work at the nuclear power plant. The plant wasn't running well. We were in trouble, all kinds of trouble with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Work was very, very stressful. And I spent long hours at work, and my alcoholism got worse. My depression deepened. You know, my isolationist attitude took over, and the loneliness associated that was with overwhelming. I used to isolate from my wife. I'd sit out there on the porch drinking, ignoring her. I began to have suicidal ideations. My wife began going to Al-Anon, which probably was a very good thing for her, but for me, uh, it felt like she was abandoning me because she was going to take care of herself and wasn't about to do anything to take care of me. And I think that's a little twisted because that's not what Al-Anon's all about, but it felt that way to me. You know, it just was a vicious cycle. I think I hit bottom with alcoholism when she decided she was going to go start going to 2 Al-Anon meetings a week, and that just really pissed me off. Um, and I don't want to go into it, but I have to give my wife credit for this. She realized that I was hurting, and she arranged an intervention for me. And she flew my children from wherever they were. They were all out of state, and we did the intervention with a professional, and my whole family drove me over to the place where I went into treatment. And I would have to say that was a life-saving event. It was also probably um, one of the most loving events in my life because all my kids cared about me, and she cared enough to do something for me, something that I couldn't do for myself because I was really suffering. And so, you know, I have to give my wife a ton of credit for doing what she did. Um, I guess it was in treatment when I first started exploring what happened as a child and all that, and the abandonment that was truly there that I didn't even recognize. And it was kind of earth shattering. It was very emotional, and I was crying for things that I didn't understand why I was crying. And I went through all of that. I need to get to the CoDA part of this, but you know, the treatment got me sober, but I was emotionally much worse off. You know, my therapist once told me, well, where you went to treatment, they kind of did open heart surgery on you and got you started with all these emotional things and then forgot to sew you back up, you know. And so I was released from treatment with open wounds. So I think I can safely say I needed some emotional support. And that's where and understanding, and that's where CoDA came into me. I went into family of origin work. I understand my history. I finally believed, because like I said, I was an engineer and I needed to prove it to myself. I finally believed that my upbringing wasn't as perfect as I thought it was, and that there was all kinds of abandonment involved with it. And I was seriously wounded, left wounded as a result of that. Um, Let me see where I want to skip down to. I learned a lot of tools, on how to release my emotions and get in touch with my emotions, and honestly forgive my parents for doing the best they could do, but it still left me wounded. And so, I can say that I think I can comfortably say that I truly have forgiven my folks for not being a part of my childhood, in so many ways. Um, CoDA, two things CoDA did was give me the tools to improve my self-esteem and give me the tools to understand my higher power. And, I think the higher power part of that is central to my recovery, understanding that I have a God that loves me and a God that I love. When I first started talking about this with my therapist and doing step work and stuff and such, my therapist basically said, "You have a God that loves you." And I went, "What?" I don't, I just didn't understand that, and he kept telling me that. And I finally decided okay, I'll just push the I believe button. It's kind of like step two, I came to believe. And then step three was turn it over. And in there was the repeated pushing of the I believe button. And it finally took hold, and as a result, I started loving myself, and I started loving my God, and I started being courageous, and I started having self-respect, and I started speaking up for myself, and I started setting boundaries, and learning that I don't really have to live the life that I'm living. I can change it, and it's up to me to do that and do something different. One of those things was, and this was the hardest decision I think I've ever made in my life, was to divorce my wife. We were married for 42 years. And we went through therapy several times together on couples therapy. And I think my recovery allowed me to kind of let go of some of the history, at least try to let go of some of the history. But for whatever reason, and I'm not blaming her, I'm not holding this against her, she could not let go of a lot of the baggage that she had an excellent memory about and had no hesitation about bringing it up to me. She could quote something or cite something that I did 30 years ago that I have no memory of, that it's really important to her. It was impactful for her, but she couldn't let it go. And finally, the therapist said, "What do you guys want to do with yourselves? Do you want to continue working on this?" There's a long story associated with that therapist, but we were on the spot kind of to have to make a decision. You want to keep doing this, or what do you want to do? And I finally said, you know what? I don't want to live my life unhappy, and I don't want to live my life being chastised, or whatever the word is, for something I did years ago that, she doesn't seem to be able to forgive me about. I don't even remember what it is, so it was painful for her to bring that up to me, because okay, I'm sure I did that. I don't disbelieve you, but I don't remember it. So after 42 years, we divorced. And so happens that because it was so long, it so happens it happened at the same time I was retiring. And so during the divorce, I saw half of my life savings get cut away and given to her, and she was entitled to every penny of that. But at the same time, I had no future income. So it was a kind of a scary thing to have to go through all of that as well. But it worked out. I may not have as much money as could have had, but I have enough. Thank God for that. I have enough. And I'm happy. I have all kinds of new friends that I never had before. Took me a while to get going with online dating after having not dated for 40 years, but I found a woman online, and we have a relationship that I really cherish. And so that is kind of coming together. I'm a lot better than I used to be, and CoDA did that for me. I need to hurry up here. I still have work to do. I still get triggered. There's still vestiges of my old angry inner teenager that shows up now and then and gets mad at things, and I have to talk to him and work things out with him, and that's all good. I love him. I think he loves me. I have an inner child that I talk to, and we love each other. But it is an endless journey of self-discovery. That's what CoDA is all about. And so I'm continuing to follow that. I guess I will say that recovery for me really boils down to three very simple things. This is what has worked for me. I've accepted that I'm human, and I forgive my mistakes. I love myself, including my shortcomings. I recognize I have shortcomings, but I love myself. I give myself and my teenager and my child a hug every once in a while, and just say, you're good. And I have a loving God and a God that I love, and I allow him to love me. And that makes a huge difference to have something that's a higher power that I can just lean on and let things go and not turn it over to him and not stress with all the details, because it's God's plan. And, it's just comfortable to be able to do that. I guess that's all I have to say about me. It's an amazing thing. I'll say this about self-esteem real quickly. After the break, I'm going to talk about my service to CoDA. And a lot of that is, I do that because it is self-esteeming. It gives me a basis to have good self-esteem. I can love myself because of the things I do. And that is a lot of my motivation for providing service for CoDA. It's deeply a part of my recovery, in my emotional recovery. Tradition. I'm going to talk about seventh tradition. And we all know it says every CoDA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. And for me, for a long time, the last part of that, declining outside contributions, was the only part that I really understood. It's about money. We are self-supporting. We collect money in the basket at meetings. We take some of that money and we give it to the church, maybe if that's where our meeting is at, or the fellowship hall, or take some of that money and maybe give it to the regional intergroup. For us, it's called, their name is AnCor, Arizona North and Central CoDA region. You give some money to them, and you keep a prudent reserve in case something unexpected comes up, and you have money, you have a treasurer that watches over that money, and it's all about money. And you decline outside contributions because you really don't want to feel obligated to anybody. We don't want somebody coming in and because they've given us a healthy donation, you don't want to feel obligated to them. It's kind of like a political thing where you make a donation to a politician, you expect that politician to do something for you. And if people in the group, when I say group, I mean meeting, it could be the AnCor intergroup, it could be a committee at coda.org, at Incorporated or International. The group goes top to bottom. If that group feels obligated to somebody that's not, doesn't have CoDA in their heart, well, you might make a decision that's not the right decision for CoDA. So and for your co-members of the fellowship, we're here. CoDA is all about unity, and the unity that we want to maintain is the unity within CoDA, not blur it with some outside person's or organization's influence. And so for me, that's what it was all about, you know. And it comes down to, even, you know, if you like the church where we used to, and hopefully someday still will, have our face-to-face CoDA meeting, the church gave us the room for free. They didn't expect us to pay them anything, but we always did, because we didn't want to feel as though we were getting any kind of a handout or a gift or anything like that, that, you know, where the church could maybe somehow influence us, and for us to have a clear conscience that we were self-supporting. We didn't need anybody's handout, if you will. So we chose not to do that. And so, you know, for a long time, that's all I went to meetings and I put my buck or two in the basket, and the treasurer collected it, and we had a group meeting, business meeting. We decided what we were going to do with the money, and that was all there was to it. But if you've ever taken the time to read the green workbook on Tradition 7, self-supporting is a huge part of that tradition, and it really has very little to do with money. And I never really paid much attention to the first part of that, you know, story. Every CoDA group ought to be fully self-supporting. And what that's talking about is service. Service is made up, by and large, maybe to the vast majority of CoDA volunteers. I think there are some paid employees of CoDA at the very highest level that provide service to us, maybe legal counsel or administrative support or something, but there are very few people that actually are paid to do their services with CoDA. It's all volunteers. And that's the first part about this tradition, is we are self-supporting by our own service to the organization. And what does that mean? At the meeting level, which is the most important level, the meeting level, it's that people share. And it's that people speak at a speaker meeting. And it's that people even attend and listen. You don't really have to do anything, but supporting CoDA meetings is probably the most important element of all support. You know, and then you can go up to higher levels within CoDA, and I have. My service started pretty simply. What happened? Am I still there? My screen went blank. My home group meeting, it was the first meeting that I went to for a brand new meeting. And it was started by people that are important to me, and we were doing a lot of organization, and they wanted somebody to be a group service representative, and nobody raised their hand. And I didn't even know what that meant, to be a group service representative, a GSR. But I said, okay, I'll give it a try. You know, we'll see. Maybe I just felt very codependent and said, oh, we got silence in the room. Somebody's got to do it. I guess it should be me. And I just stuck my hand up, and all of a sudden I was the GSR for that meeting. And I said, well, what does that mean? Well, we're not sure either, but why don't you call this guy, and and he'll get you fixed up. Well, I've been the GSR for that meeting for 5 years now, and it got me started in the idea of CoDA service. In the beginning, I didn't get much out of it. I went to the AnCor intergroup regional meetings, and they happen every 2 months. And I met some people there. I met people that I now consider to be, sort of lifelong recovery friends, people that are important in my life. But it wasn't, it really wasn't very recovery supported. It gave me, I could feel good about going and being more than just me, attending a meeting. But what it did do was expose me to the other areas within CoDA. And there's so many areas within CoDA that most people don't know about, or, because they don't know about it, they don't care about it. And, it's that kind of thing. So having been exposed to those other areas within CoDA, I decided that I wanted more. I wanted to try more of it. It wasn't as fulfilling as I had hoped it would be after going to a whole bunch of AnCor meetings. And, we talked about stuff, but it wasn't really very effective. AnCor wasn't, super dynamic. It was a meeting and we talked about stuff, and that's about as far as it went. Um, when I was blessed when I got out of treatment for alcohol, and part of my post-treatment recovery plan hooked me up with a man and woman who are very influential and knowledgeable about CoDA. And those people helped me through all kinds of problems, my own personal problems. And I grew to love CoDA through them, and I grew to love them. And partly out of respect for them and my desire and my love for CoDA, I decided that I wanted to, participate at a higher level. I think that probably the first thing that I committed to that was at any higher level was in October of 2016. Some of you will remember that CoDA celebrated its 30th birthday. And that 30th birthday was held with a CoDA service conference and a convention in Carefree, Arizona, which is about 30 miles north of Phoenix. And I decided that I wanted to be on the committee that hosted that convention conference. And I was the transportation chairman, and I didn't know what that was. But basically my role was to shuttle delegates to the service conference from the airport to the Carefree Resort and Conference Center, which is about a 35-mile drive. And me and another fellow who I truly love, we put our heart and soul into that. We had 2 vans that we must have made dozens of trips between, not dozens, but quite a few trips. And the beauty of that was, for those 35 miles, which is probably about a 45-minute drive, I got to sit and talk to CoDA people, CoDA delegates, recovery, deep recovery and with many of them for 45 minutes, all day long. And it was just an absolute miracle that and I just celebrated the fact that I was blessed enough to meet all these people. And the highlight of that was one of the trips I took all by myself. Was on the dinner meeting was Saturday night, and the keynote speaker flew in on Saturday, and I drove down to the airport to get him. And he was the only one in the van, and he was an unbelievable CoDA recovery person. And for 45 minutes, I talked with this guy that was so deep into CoDA recovery. It literally changed my life, that somebody could be the way he was with CoDA. And so that was my blessing, that I got out of that opportunity to serve. It's a simple thing, drive people to and from the airport. But the result was that I got to meet some pretty darn cool people. And I got to meet people that were in service at the world level, the international level, who were actually running the CoDA service conference and the convention that followed that. And so, if nothing else, I met people that were influential for me in CoDA, and that's, that little simple act of service did that for me. I think probably the next thing, Christina's already shared a little bit about it, was that she decided she had a vision that she wanted to do something with the Arizona Events Committee, and she wanted to make turn it into something that was really doing something. And she and I, like she said, we met at a retreat. We became really close friends. She is my angel cake, and I am her apple dumpling. And and we were a perfect fit because she could find people to come do the workshops, and she knew enough people, you know, in the CoDA world to know what was important, what were the priorities, who could, you know, who could do the work of the prep workshops. And I was good at making it happen. I was the guy that set it up. You know, I went to the church where we went and we made sure the tables were arranged. And we made sure that supplies were, I was the supply guy. I had boxes of crackers and plates and coffee and all that stuff that you needed. And we made it really, you know, cans of soda and ice buckets and, you know, everything that makes it happen, including the audio at the church, you know. And the beauty of that was it was a lot of work. It was really a lot of work. But the beauty of that was I got to meet, you know, we had anywhere from 50 maybe to 150 people come to these workshops. And, you know, there was socializing, there was hugging. You can't do that now with this stupid pandemic, but maybe we're getting closer to that. We did that for like 3 years, that live workshop stuff until the pandemic shut it down. And it was an amazing opportunity to provide service. You know, there are events committee people that operate at the international level, and they do a fantastic job. We had our own little thing going here, and it was a beautiful thing. And, you know, it grew, you know, let's see. It started on May 20th, 2017, when 4 people shared their experience, strength, and hope at a speaker meeting, speaker workshop. And then we went on to present 43 live workshops and fun events. You know, basically twice a month we had something. That went until, you know, March of 2020 when the pandemic shut us down. And it was just an amazing experience to have done that. I coach, like Christina said, I co-chaired the events committee. I was the treasurer for the committee up until just recently. I was that. You know, it was a wonderful opportunity to provide service. And again, what I got out of that was, it goes back to self-esteem. You know, I felt good about doing that, and I could look at myself and love myself for having given that work, and meeting other people that would, you know, show their love to me, and I could show their love to them, my love to them. And you know, it's just that service to a lot of people. That was an amazing thing. You know, and of course, obviously, when the pandemic struck, the Saturday Speaker Series was created, or, you know, envisioned by Christina. I kind of dropped out at that point because you don't need a supplies guy for an online Zoom meeting. So my strength really wasn't, you know, needed to do that. I did continue to do the treasurer job because it turned out to be pretty simple to keep track of Zoom expenses and however much money that was collected due to Seventh Tradition contributions. But we, you know, we started from $300 that the AnCor seed money they gave us for seed money, and in our bank balance now is in the neighborhood of $5,600, and that money is being used to. The goal is to be able to hold a three-day or so face-to-face conference someplace nice where people can get together and have a nice workshop. And, you know, to do that, it's expensive, and you got to put money out front to do that. And we have the money to do it. We just, you know, as Christina said, we're struggling trying to find a place to do it. Everybody's coming back from the pandemic, and it's, you know, all these places are booked. That's what I'm hearing. And so the money's there anyway. And we Christina and the whole committee, including the people that did literature at the committee, at the events, did a fantastic job. The next thing I did was I volunteered to become the webmaster for the AnCor regional, the intergroup. And so I'm an engineer, and I like to code. Software is kind of cool, and webmastering is something that I always wanted to do. And here was an opportunity to learn something that I was interested in and also provide service. Well, I'll be honest, I didn't do squat with that for like a year. I took on the position. I was busy doing other things. I was, you know, divorcing my wife and going through retirement, and I just didn't have a lot of time to spend on it, so I didn't. Um, I wish I'd have been better and more proactive with that, and I do feel a little bit of shame about that, but it's healthy shame. I really should have done better. I'm not beating myself up about it, but I had reasons. I was super busy. So the web mastering thing languished. I was talking to Lisa before the thing in September 2019. I went to the CoDA Service Conference representing Arizona in Atlanta, and Lisa was the facilitator for the whole CoDA Service Conference. She stood up in front of us for 4 days and tried to maintain order and control of a room full of codependent people, um, which is no easy task. But she did a wonderful job at it. Every time I think of that convention and the people that made it happen, she's number one on the list. She was amazing. That was also the first conference where we had online attendees, and we had people from Mexico, we had people from Guatemala, we had a man from Israel, we had a guy from Iran. These people have 8-hour time differences. So when we were meeting at 4 in the afternoon, it was, well, I don't know, 2 a.m. for them. These were committed people trying to spread the fellowship into countries where I think codependence is probably just as prevalent there as it is anywhere. And yet they were willing to get online and do it from home. It was an amazing experience. And in those service conferences, you get to see the real business side of CoDA. And the cool thing about doing that is, you participate in the evolution of CoDA, the progress of CoDA, and you get to vote on stuff, anything, anywhere from simple, minor changes to the fellowship service manual, or all the way up to maybe changing our traditions, which is a super difficult and really important thing to do. Those traditions have been around for a long time, and people are very careful about them, and a lot of discussion. But the point is, you really felt like you were a part of CoDA. You were bringing it forward. You were making it better. You were doing it with a whole bunch of people in a room that were representing voting entities from all over the country and all over the world in that case. And everybody has their own idea, and everybody had a voice, and everybody could speak, and we could challenge it, and we could craft the words if we didn't quite like them. And then we voted on it, and it took a majority, to pass, and a 2/3 majority would mean the board couldn't, they had to accept it. And a lot of things passed with 2/3. So, it was a very cool experience. It was very rewarding. Um, let's see. After the conference in Georgia, they also had a convention, which anybody could go to. The conference was reserved for voted in approved delegates, representing your voting entity, basically your state, in simple terms. I went for Arizona. Other people, Southern California, Northern California, they have two different voting entities, but basically it's, a regional voting entity. You have to be a delegate to go there. But the conventions, which I highly recommend everybody to go to, wherever they might be, are 3 days or 2.5 days of people doing workshops, people speaking. You get to meet people and talk to them. You get to go to lunch and dinner with them. It's a wonderful experience, and I got to do that in Atlanta. And so I got to meet some people, some Georgia people, and it was fun. And then the next year, I went as the senior delegate. The first year was the junior delegate. The next year, I went as the senior delegate, and unfortunately, the pandemic had struck. That one was online. It wasn't nearly as much fun because you didn't have the personal contact. We had a Zoom bomber that messed with us for about a half an hour, and it wasn't the same. But again, we were voting on things that moved CoDA forward, And that part of it was exactly the same. And it was very effective and very rewarding to have a say in where CoDA moves forward. I mean, it's all group conscience. You don't always get what you want. In fact, most of the time you don't get exactly what you want, but you do get to hear other perspectives and see things maybe from a different light, and you end up putting yourself behind it with a group conscious vote that everybody moved with, and they went ahead and proceeded with whatever the decisions were that were made at the service conference. And those took place after we left, obviously, but changes to whatever needed to be changed. Interestingly enough, in that one last summer, and I want to just share this very quickly, one of the motions was, we move that the CoDA Service Conference declare the 2021 the year of service to the fellowship. We ask that every CoDA meeting, every standing committee, and the CoDA board all mount a campaign emphasizing service as a basic part of recovery. And I think that motion kind of describes where I'm at, that CoDA service is a basic part of my recovery. And, and that's was a major motivator for me. And my wish would be that it becomes a major motivator for a lot of people, because it is really rewarding. Actually, the CoDA Service Conference starts Monday, officially, this coming Monday, and it's online again. And it'll be, I imagine, pretty much the same as it was last year, with a whole different set of motions to review and approve. And then after that, it's going to be in South Dakota, I believe. And by then, hopefully, the pandemic will be under control and they can get back to meeting face to face, and we can have a convention afterwards where everybody gets to meet a lot of people. Anyway. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about my current role in service to CoDA, and that is the AnCor website administrator, the webmaster. And I'll use the word master very loosely because I'm far from a master at it. I'm getting better at it, and the website is growing, and it is a pretty cool place to go. In fact, I'm going to share that with you a little bit. I'm the one that does the changes on the website. I have a committee that we review. In fact, we met this morning before this event, and looked at and approved some changes to the website that's going to provide, speakers experience, strength, and hope, kind of a blog thing that we're trying to get rolling on. It's going to be a new addition to the website. Doing the website's really a pretty good fit for me. I like doing the software part of it. The code, it's not really coding per se, but and I like to write, and I like to work with people, and I get to work with the events committee to keep their stuff online. I work with the outreach committee, who's doing a fantastic job with reaching out to newcomers, reaching out to professionals to give them some insight and support. Working with AnCor, the regional intergroup, to get their word out and support them. So I'm sort of the make it happen guy, who listens to everybody that's out there doing real work and putting it together so everybody else can share with it, which I enjoy doing. I'm going to take this moment to share with you the website, because I don't think people have seen it and really even know what it's all about. Let me see if I can get this right. So here's the website that we've worked really hard on, a lot of us. It's and I'm going to go through this really quickly. I just want people to know some of the highlights of it. It's the front page we're looking at here is written for the newcomer. It talks about what is CoDA and how really easy it is to become a member of CoDA. All you have to have is a desire to improve relationships, and goes over the CoDA organization. And, it's kind of, I suppose, some of it's in Spanish and English. We're working to improve the multilingual part of it. And there's, that part It kind of gives you an overview. Over here, right here, you click on Arizona CoDA meetings. If you want to find a meeting, here's all the meetings that are registered on CoDA.org throughout the whole state, broken down by day and time and location. Most of them are Zoom meetings now. You can go here in this column, Zoom or teleconference. The link to the meeting using Zoom is there. You just click on it, and in most cases, you just go right into the meeting. Obviously, this one is Sunday at 3 p.m. If you click on it on Sunday at 3 p.m., you'll enter that meeting. It's a super handy tool for all, and these are all the Arizona meetings. You know, you go down here and you click on Arizona Events and Workshops, and it takes you to basically this series. It's got the flyer on there. It's got the link here to go. If you ever forget what the link is, you just click right there and use this password to get in. It's got, I'll just talk about the events committee here. Here's the AnCor Events Committee that, you know, that sponsors this series. Here's the last live workshop, retreat that we had. We all had a campfire meeting afterwards in the dark, and we all sat around and had a meeting. And, you know, here's that flyer that we just looked at, trying to get people to help out with the retreat that they're planning later this year. And what's really cool is that we have workshop libraries. Here's you know, if you click here, you go to a whole bunch of the Saturday Speaker Series workshops that were done in the past. You just click on the link and it, you know, it takes you right there. Or if you want to go back to the workshops that were done before the pandemic, you know, there's all these live workshops that are available on the website that you can just listen to. All of these things are just really one click away. If you know, so here's the AnCor Intergroup. Talks about what AnCor does. It's a great opportunity for service to be on AnCor, be a GSR for your meeting and attend AnCor meetings. It tells you how to provide a 7th tradition donation contribution to AnCor. The links are all there. You know, the website's got a lot of stuff on it, and the things that I think are the most powerful are the, you know, how to find a meeting. And if you want to go back and look at a workshop, there are many, many, many links to workshops, and they're not all the same as what's on the Facebook page that the events committee runs. There's a lot of overlap, but there's some different things to go look at for that. Then I'm going to move on to share probably the last thing here that I want to share with you that most people don't even know about is that CoDA has the 12 service concepts. And I've underlined, these are my underlines that you see on here, but these are parts of it that, and this is available on CoDA.org. You can just click on 12 service concepts or type in search for 12 service concepts, and you can go to this. For me right here, carry the message to codependents who still suffer. Was key to me. You know, trusted servants like me are directly responsible to those they serve, you know, and so the codependent who continues to suffer is who I serve. You come down here, you know, we encourage spiritual principles in everything we do, you know, it's kind of like the 12th step. And every member has the right to know what's happening with an organization. So the CSC, the CoDA Service Conference, the website, CoDA.org, all that information is, you know, part of service. So that's my history with service. But, you know, so I want to tell you what I got out of all this service. You know, primarily I learned about myself. I feel better about myself. My self-esteem has gone up a lot because I felt good about what I was doing. I gave myself an opportunity, a reason, a basis to self-esteem myself. I found that helps me to love myself because I'm doing things that I don't have to do. I don't even need to do. I want to do it because I love myself. And part of loving myself is, for me, is giving myself a basis, repeating and enforcing and reminded me that I have a reason to love myself because of the work that I do for CoDA. There are a lot of other things in my life that I do too that do that for me, but CoDA is a big part of it. Hmm. I'll tell you this, service has given me a chance, many opportunities to become closer to my higher power. It's challenging. Sometimes you don't want to do what you got to do. Sometimes you're tired. Sometimes you're triggered. Sometimes you're unhappy. Sometimes you just don't want to do it. And so I would search out my higher power and look for strength and, his will for me and support me in my decision to proceed. And, I learned that I can change how I feel. If I'm feeling, angry, I don't have to feel angry. I can go to my God and talk a little bit about with him and decide, I mean, literally decide that I don't want to be angry today. And I have God's support for that. I want to close with one thing. I'm not a huge fan of Oprah Winfrey, but I did watch a whole bunch of her Super Soul Sunday series of television shows. I don't know if any of you have ever watched that. Oprah brought in amazing people that she would interview, and all she would do is ask questions, and these men and women would talk and and share their life's experiences. And some of them were Buddhists, and some of them were, what you name the religion, and some of them were just very spiritual. They were all very spiritual. It was a very spiritual show. And almost every one of them, I captured some kind of a little spiritual nugget. I call them a spiritual principle to live by. And I have about 30 or 40 of them in a list that I captured after watching all these shows. And one of them that I loved, that I used, I like to think of as part of why I do service, is this one. And it's simple. Let God flow through you like wind through a flute. What does that mean? I embrace my God. I listen to my God. I take my God's will and implement it. And part of his will is for me to do service to CoDA. And um, what I do, I feel as though is God's wind through a flute that you can all hear. I want you to hear. So service is what lets me do that. And I love it, and I will continue to do it because it has been so beneficial in my recovery. And with that, I will pass. Thank you for letting me share.